Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of That Early Childhood Nerd. I'm Heather Bernt-Santy. My guest today is Erin Neimark. Hi, Erin.
I
Erin and I have been emailing for mo literally months, trying to get this recording set up. Um, Started with a conversation about an article you wrote for Voices of Practitioners many years ago, and just has sort of evolved into the conversation we're going to get to them to the listeners today. But would you please tell folks about yourself, what you do,
yeah,
and where you all that good stuff?
yeah. I am a TK teacher, so 4 and 5 year olds in a public school for the last 3 years. But most of my career has been teaching kindergarten for about 20, almost 20 years. A little bit of preschool before that in the mid
Mhm.
90s. So I guess it's almost 30 years
Nice.
working with somewhere between 3 and 6 year olds.
Uh-huh. Nice.
Yeah,
And so transitional kindergarten is kind of like uh universal pre-K might
Mhm.
be in another state. Um, if people haven't heard that term before.
Yeah, it's sort of like it could be that third year preschool for other
Mhm.
people if they can afford it and if they like where they were. But
Uh-huh.
it's this way to get into the public school system earlier, and it's supposed to be that sort of perfect hybrid between preschool with a little bit larger ratio and then kindergarten where it's usually going to be one teacher for 20
Hmm.
kids. Our ratio is 2 to 22 for now. Next year
Uh-huh.
it'll be 2 to 20. So better ratio, younger kids, sort of that trying to find that hybrid has sort of been the work so far, the
Yeah.
middle ground without
Yeah.
it staging ground for K, preparation for K without doing K, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So when we first started talking, I was mostly interested in your "Do you want to see something goofy" article. Just because you talk in that article about a couple of different times children's sense of humor. And I think at the time that we first started emailing, that was something I was thinking about a lot. But I think we're going to pivot. We just decided this before I hit record to because I'd like to hear you talk about things you do. You're 30 years in to keep yourself fresh and to keep yourself engaged in the work. It's tough work. And so kind of three things came up. One is your practice, whether it's formal or informal, of being sort of a teacher researcher. And then you started talking about Zoom meetings that you have with other teachers. And then you talked a little bit about podcasts and things you listen to. Um, so I don't have a quote for this one because we literally just changed the direction of the conversation right before I hit record. But would you pick one of those three things and start
Yeah.
talking about it, and then we'll see where we go.
Yeah, I mean, when I first started, I went to college to maybe teach history. I didn't think I'd get into the to teaching the youngest ones, but when I started out working at this incredibly interesting and play-based preschool in 1995 when I came up to San Francisco from college in LA. I'm from around here, but I came
Uh-huh.
and this visionary director was had this approach that was just extremely respectful and kind and speaking to children in normal, respectful ways. Sometimes thought they were talking to adults. I was like, wait, sounded nice. And she was like, yeah, you can try it out. And I was like, okay. She didn't know much about me, but
Uh-huh.
thought I had a knack with little ones. And she was a big influence on always having young children articles up in the office and having research there and knowing how to back up with staff and parents just a little bit about some background. Oh, they
Hmm.
don't have the bones yet for that kind of writing, or they can't really sit longer than twice their age and things like she would just come up with a lot of that kind of stuff that I realized I gotta get cracking on that more, read more about it myself. I had just started taking a couple of child development classes at that point. Before
Yeah.
I studied Middle Eastern history in college, so I wasn't thinking about this yet.
Yeah.
But that gave me a sense of that there's something more to just not just being with kids and liking kids, but where's the background here and not super theoretical, but where's some interesting stuff I can read that can tie into
Hmm.
the work. And I would
Yeah.
use that to talk to other teachers too. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember this is sort of a familiar story. I think there's so many of us who don't get into birth to 5 years at least. straight just saying, this is what I want to do, so I'm going to study it and I'm going to get that job. We all kind of stumble in a different direction from different ways. But I very vividly remember working with 2-year-olds, loving it, feeling like I had a skill for it, um, and having no idea it was something I could study or
Mhm.
something I could learn more about until I stumbled across some writing that taught me about the developmental domains. And I was like, oh, this is deeper work than I thought it was.
Yeah, and imagine that learning just like I would learn about modern Middle East, what happened after World War II or whatever, and learning that it helps to have some context. Same thing, you'd be learning about why certain activities make more sense for certain kids and why, and the levels that their thinking may be at, and then getting deeper into it later about what about the impact of culture. It's not just Piaget and that's that. What
Uh-huh.
about how they do with each other? What about how word gap? What about looking at things differently that are often seen as one way? The
Hmm.
standard way. Um, so I thought a couple years into preschool, I'll do kindergarten only. Like I'll get a credential, but I just want to do kindergarten because now I know how they're supposed to be before kindergarten. And I'll figure it out. And I got it all figured out. And I felt like I had all this experience when I got
Uh-huh.
a credential to do kindergarten, which was impossible. So
Uh,
hard in that 2001 when I first started teaching kindergarten. Really difficult. I didn't know how to work with different children that I didn't have a background with, and it was really tough.
huh.
But what kept me going there was support at the school, but also the master's program. Can I finish this? I got a credential a few years earlier, but not a master's degree yet. So I thought I'm going to keep going and studying this stuff and get an MA out of it at San Francisco State, where I already had gotten the credential. Quite a
Uh-huh.
few people would just, use those units and apply more and then get an MA.
Hmm.
So because that group that I was with and the professors were so they were so helpful and they sort of believed in the students so much that I was like, whoa, I have something I can write about and say about the kids that I'm working with. So it was like a program for when you're working part-time.
Hmm.
And so that was the ultimate experience to be learning some theory and different coursework and then going back to the place you were doing your placement. And at that point, I went back to that preschool.
Oh,
So I
okay.
school, then a little break back to that preschool for a year or so, and then public since then. So it
Yeah.
was kind of a little bounce back. But that's when I got a chance to do some research and be sitting there in the preschool doing sort of ethnographic style research or writing
Uh-huh.
which is the basis of what became that article, which was
Yeah.
all article because the professors were like, you should turn this into an article instead of just
Yeah.
dusty thesis on a shelf somewhere.
Yeah. So will you talk a little bit about what it means to be an I can't remember exactly what you said, the ethnographic researcher, observer, like I can imagine people listening and thinking, I'm not a scientist, I work with children, but it's an interesting way of thinking about
Yeah.
the way we notice what's happening.
It was all from William Corsaro's work, and the sociologist who,
Yeah.
and his writings was in the early 80s, I think, but
Yeah.
he had talked about himself as being, embedded with a group of children. Of course, they know he's an adult, but he wasn't a teacher, and they called him Big Bill or something eventually.
Uh-huh.
So he got in a way accepted into this group so that they would do what they would sort of normally do in their natural state without a person staring at them and watching, get off the fence or whatever.
Yeah.
He started to do what he thought they would just do if you don't watch or aren't around kids.
Uh-huh.
So I got so into his writing about the special meaning of all the stuff that children did in engaged in play. And of course, he calls it, peer culture,
Uh-huh.
but that exists everywhere and everywhere. There's peer culture in a church meeting. There's peer culture at a staff meeting. There's peer culture in adult ed. What are the rules of how the students really act? How do they interact with each other? How do we do a little sigh with our friend across the hall? Across the way? How do we be fully engaged maybe in some topic, not the next topic, but the rules that are unspoken about the norms of interaction.
Uh-huh.
And he would write about the special meaning certain objects took on. And so that became so interesting to me that once I started looking at it that way, you could look at anything that way. Like, why are those
Uh-huh.
using the blocks like that? If they put them in their pockets and hide them in their backpacks, why? What are they doing that
Yeah.
for? instead of getting annoyed at the fact that they're doing it, maybe we can do both, be annoyed,
Yeah.
but also say there's got to be some meaning behind this,
Yeah.
to for some kind of social currency, to make friends, to hoard some item like a some kind of a, you know, prison currency. There's got to be meaning behind this. And so I
Yeah.
was looking at the play of some of the kids in the yard that they knew me, but I was clearly like not on duty at these times.
Uh-huh.
Safety. I wasn't like in charge. I was just out there with
Yeah.
a notebook and watching and trying to make meaning out of, understand what their meanings were in their
Yeah.
play.
Yeah. I think that that phrase, there's got to be something behind this, can really change a person's day working with young children. Like if you go through, at least for me, I feel like the times of my career where I was sort of in survival mode and going through the day just being tired or irritated or wondering why I'd lost control of something. That's a really hard and exhausting way to go through so many hours of your life. And I feel like if I had discovered that there might be something behind the stuff that I felt like was annoying or confusing or hard to control earlier in my career, um, it would have, I don't know. There was a time when I felt like I was burned out, and so I quit and went and worked at a bank and found out 6 months in that I didn't care about banking and I needed to get back with the kids. And that was a long time ago. I feel like there's so much more talk about burnout now.
Yeah.
That could be just a not a cure all, but a simple post it in my classroom somewhere. There must be something behind this as a reminder to
Yeah. And
be,
do we
even if
have a
I am
colleague?
annoyed, I can still be curious.
Yeah, and is there a colleague to say, hey, at your carpet time, do they just talk to each other? And you, at your carpet time, what's the parts where they laugh? Which
Yeah.
parts do they actually watch? How long is your carpet time? Okay, sure.
Hmm.
But how do we make uh and the people, Rebecca Cantor, Samara Madrid, and Elgas, I forget his first name, but they wrote a lot about this peer culture stuff from after Corsaro or at the same time as
Hmm.
Corsaro. And in fact, I got in touch with Rebecca Cantor during the writing of this thesis, who was like, oh, starstruck by this professor who wrote about this sociological approach. And she became like an informal thesis advisor on the phone,
Hmm.
like 2005 or something. Just encouraged me to say, you got to keep writing this kind of approach. And I was just taking their approach. Like,
Yeah.
how do you take their lens on the work that you're doing with kids? And then in a public school, when you're almost alone, usually you're like, this is really hard, and you can't sit back and watch anything because
Yeah.
doing it all. And
Yeah.
you think you're supposed to be in control all the time, and you're supposed to be creating the classroom culture, which is not. It's always co-created, whether you like it or not.
Hmm.
So if we embrace that and say, what, for example, and I wrote something later on in another book about well, my chapter was about humor. What
Yeah.
about my carpet time is interesting and funny that we both like? And the only thing that overlapped was humor.
Uh-huh.
And when I had to do the name of the day stuff, and we developed my own routines that were sort of, I felt fun and appropriate. But if we had to do stuff like shared writing and look at word versus letter and all the stuff for kindergarten, how could I make it interesting and funny and brief so that most of them, would actually pay attention and not just want to like derail it for the other
Right.
forces that say, I'm just going to act a fool and derail it. Instead, they're going to laugh because we're counting the letters, and they're going to be engaged because we're using a different language each time. Okay.
Mm.
And then we're going to write the sentence, and we're going to read it backwards also. And they're like, ha ha. And then whatever it was. And it became a routine that I more recently came back to in this class going, wait a minute, I know how to engage the carpet time.
Uh-huh.
It's this humor, it's this style, it's this stuff I learned about my own practice like a decade ago or more, and I'm bringing it back now to help me through a carpet time this year with a really difficult class. So like
Yeah.
my own work or looks or lens was my own answer to
Yeah.
some of my problems rather than just thinking of a fancy tool to make them comply. I mean,
Sure.
everybody that or a punishment consequence thing versus
Yeah.
trying to make a way to make this funny and engaging and not awful.
Yeah. That's interesting. I think sometimes, like I said a little bit ago that I'd been thinking about humor a lot and reading about it a lot. And that was as part of the research I was doing for the book that I just finished. And um I found myself thinking that it feels like sometimes early childhood teachers are almost afraid of humor. Like if we're silly, I don't know how to explain what I'm thinking. Like so often we see it as disruptive if children are laughing, or we've got two children sitting together who laugh all the time and we feel like that's going to be a problem, so we separate them instead of looking at like the social and cognitive value of connecting over humor. And so it's interesting that you're turning it into or using it, not turning it into, but acknowledging like its power to engage children um, in a way that isn't disruptive and in fact is preventing disruption, probably.
Yeah, and making some meaning, we hope, because a
Yeah.
lot of the work would be done by professors about this, and they weren't thinking, how do I do peer culture, but and then teach a class tomorrow with
Yeah.
5-year-olds. So that's where I was thinking, yeah, when you do have that ability to see, even if you don't want to admit it, the stuff they're really doing in the corner, which is not the way you intended your lesson to be, or your there's some reason for this. Yes,
Uh-huh.
you get the safety, don't eat the beads or whatever, sure. But like there's got to be a reason why they're collecting the shiny things on the ground
Right.
and why they're letting each other have them and saying and trying to share them. And we're trying to say, don't give them to that kid, but they also can say, you can have it if you're my friend. So like,
Hmm.
how do we help support friendship building, which is the goal of this age, one of the most
Yeah.
important goals, and also being reflective enough to say, that was a boring book I read, but that seems to be more interesting over there. Or
Yeah.
even while you're reading it, they seem to be doing funny faces back and forth or whatever. And also they might be saying mean things to each other. I mean, peer
Yeah.
culture is going to be
Sure.
a good thing. So if we recognize what it is and how it comes out, how do we work with it and back to our own power in a way? So we're using
Uh-huh.
their reality of their culture in a way, peer culture, back to utilizing that you're saying as a teacher or a parent, I know how you are in a way, in this way, and I know how you want to be. So
Uh-huh.
I'll make my carpet time different or
Right.
shorter. And this activity will be more interesting. If I put out 7 rolls of masking tape for this group, it'll be better. But because I've seen them, whatever it might be, you have being
Yeah.
active enough, but that also has to be based on how are you running your class.
Yeah.
It's kindergarten and you're alone, it's going to be a lot harder.
Right.
It's early childhood where there's going to be more than one adult, probably going to be better than but and you have more
Yeah.
freedom about how they're learning because they should move around and go to play areas and touch
Right.
things. But where do you work? What kind of a boss do you have?
Mm-hmm.
Who's coming by to see what you're doing? And there's always that about what
Yeah.
kind of auditing is going on with certain curriculum or environmental scales and stuff that I know you've talked
Yeah.
about.
Yeah.
So there's that, which is so different between school to school.
Right. Um, yeah, so I want to go back a little bit because you mentioned before we hit record that you have a group of colleagues that does a regular kind of Zoom conversation. Um, and you also said, that peer culture isn't just the children, it's also the coworkers in your, wherever you are, there's peer culture. But I'm curious because I think, sorry, I'm putting together all these things that you said and trying to get it into one thing because you also talked about that there must be something behind this, having another person to talk to about it, and other adults talk to about it. Those are all really, those are all things I hear people saying they wish they had more of. The opportunity to sit and review what's happening, to vent a little if you need to vent, but also to bounce these kind of teacher researcher questions off of each other. So this group that you have now, is it formal? Is it your workplace? Is it more expanded? Like how did you get there?
Mhm. Most of TK is one per school. So
Hmm.
most of us wouldn't have a colleague of actually the grade level in your school.
Right
Next year
there.
we get one, which is going to be great to have a neighbor that's actually TK. So this had started long before I started TK. Only 3 years ago did I wake a switch. Same classroom, but different grade level for me to do TK. But people had been running this for a while where they would have back in the older days an in-person meeting at different people's schools or different people's classrooms. They'd
Hmm.
come around and talk about a certain theme and look at an area and say, what about that? How's dramatic play going for you? But and they would do that kind of meeting. And then it switched to online from COVID and stuff. But when I got in there to sort of help run it from this other teacher that does the main running, we set formal agendas. It was on a school day that was early release for our district, so it
Hmm.
became an official grade level collaboration meeting so that it was like legitimate. We have an agenda. So like
Hmm.
anybody from TK that had the time could go to that. And
Hmm.
some days we'd have way more than others. But we tried to make a sort of system for the um, agenda where we get to check in with each other informally, then have a real formal meeting and say, let's get into what units are working best for you for a certain creative curriculum. Let's get into a brief article. Or did you
Hmm.
guys listen to the podcast? Or the patience versus understanding thing? Anything I would throw in, often from your podcast or others, something that they could get a piece of and then
Hmm.
engage in it for 10, 15 minutes of the meeting. And then also another other structures I brought in from other places like teaching dilemma prompts
Hmm.
where I would ask ahead of time, can somebody bring a dilemma to the group? And then we kind of respond, clarifying questions. What does it make you think about? And although the main point was just to make that teacher reflect more and maybe help, and everyone else would be helped by hearing how they are struggling with their first 20 minutes of their day. Kids are coming,
Hmm.
some kids run in and jump all over where it's not open. What areas do you have open? And whatever dilemma it might be, it's in order to get you reflecting more. So we
Right.
would have that to be, I usually led that part of the meeting almost every month to get people thinking about the humans we work with. Because, grade level meetings can be all about like writing and painting, and that's it. Like it
Yeah.
doesn't have to be
Yeah.
about the children we have in the rooms.
Yeah.
And what about
Yeah.
how are you justifying and scheduling free play? We're going to dip into that way more next year. Like, how does it really look when you do free play?
Uh-huh.
When people can be scared of it, and it can get to pretty chaotic, and certainly has this year for me somewhat, as opposed to like guided play. So we would get into some of those conversations and also get into yes, talk about the required curriculum stuff that we do
Hmm.
get checked on about, which I find isn't really a bad curriculum. It's just me getting like too scared to open up a book or something. But really trying to get into them talk about them as humans. And people in that group had various levels of background. Some were brand new,
Yeah.
veterans in it long as me or more. And
Hmm.
so they may have been like feeling tired out, but they maybe remember this stuff from when they went to college and,
Yeah.
and master's degrees, or they're brand new and they're like, wow, all I've been told about is the way I have to have my schedule with all these minutes. I didn't think about how free plays is allowed more than I'm letting them. Even our schedule
Uh-huh.
allows for it, even our district schedule for
Uh-huh.
TK could even do it more than many people think they should, because they might be into that, isn't this kindergarten light?
Yeah.
This diet
Yeah.
can but it isn't.
Do you find um do you find that that kind of reflection comes easily, or do you find that there's a little bit of almost having to teach each other how to do reflection? Like I remember when I here's what I'm asking. I remember when I was a child care center director and I had weekly supervision meetings with each of my lead teachers, and it was really I wanted it to be reflective, just um and I was surprised that it was so hard for so many people to be reflective or to be open to not having the right answer all the time. And I find it now with my students, like if I ask them to do a reflection piece, I get a lot of reports back, not
But
necessarily the reflecting. So how does that unfold with this group that you've got?
yeah, it takes some time, I think, and it goes against a lot of the way we have been working and have been trained, right? You're
Hmm.
trained about control,
Yeah.
all that. And so reflecting can mean, I don't know. You're supposed to mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm curious about, and I don't know. And
Uh-huh.
if I do that as a teacher now, and they know I'm experienced, but I'm having a tough year or whatever, when I can present the dilemma or a reflection to them as one of them, which is what I am now, rather than some coach that isn't in the group anymore or whatever,
Hmm.
then that can go a little further, I think,
Yeah.
for some people to say, oh yeah, that's something he's saying it right out there that he's wondering about
Yeah.
get out of the classroom safer. I'm wondering how best to like do getting from one place to another, a line. We don't want
Uh-huh.
this awful oppressive line, but we got to get from one place to another.
Yeah.
And that can be a whole conversation if you want it to be. But yeah,
Yeah.
many people respond more with, yeah, I got a hack for that. I figured that one out. Like they're wanting to answer you.
Yeah.
That's sort of what you're asking for, but not really.
Yeah. We want to
You're asking,
deconstruct a little
yeah, you
first.
want your reflection to help them reflect.
Uh-huh.
You want a
Yeah.
teacher talking about how they're not connecting with an African American student and they're white. you want that to reflect back on how you're having a problem connecting with the Chinese speaking students if you're not Chinese. You
Uh-huh.
want to have that reflect back on you as to just think deeper, and that bravery it takes to say, come out right and say, this is a tough thing for me,
Right. Right.
teacher, leader, and whatever. And it's hard.
Yeah.
We did that in my own school here for years. We would meet voluntarily with a group that became as large as maybe 10 or 12 of teachers. And we would do just the dilemma thing here
Huh.
at this elementary school. As it was K-5 at the time. And just people would come, we'd know ahead of time who would bring something deliberately difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Race came up a lot, just
Sure.
we wanted it to come up and
Yeah.
say, I don't know. And it wasn't just about here's some resources. It was about
Deliberately
like,
difficult.
yeah, I'm hearing this is hard. Um, that's all these unspoken dilemmas people have all the time, and they don't
Hmm.
share them because we
Yeah.
also, as teachers, to figure it out yourself.
Yeah. So
So it's
do,
collaborative. We've always learned to just be quiet and
yeah.
figure it.
And I'm supposed to be in charge and in control. So if I say I'm struggling with something, I'm admitting that I am
Yeah, how do
not.
you do that
And
where
that's hard when we feel watched and judged. And
rather than admitting strength as a teacher, and you're in
yeah.
a curious dilemma stance
Yeah.
your whole life, hopefully, about the work.
Yeah.
For others, it does take a little work, I think. It depends if you're embedded in a community that you care about and you're
Uh-huh.
not bogged down with working conditions only problems. So our
Yeah.
meetings culture, talk about peer culture, the meetings used to just be really miserable, like structural complaints that we
Hmm.
needed to have. Like we needed that to be the bathrooms are too small or we don't have one.
Hmm.
Fifth graders are trampling the TKers outside. Like some schools were like, I figured that one out. Like, here, just talk to your admin. But it became like a long list of stuff that
Yeah.
had to share, but it wasn't a fun experience. Like you're
Yeah.
just like,
Yeah. Yeah. I can imagine. I think
isn't
I've been
for
in some
everyone.
of those meetings for
And
sure.
when we structured the other part into the meeting before that part,
Yeah.
connect with each other. How's your rose and the thorn about your day? Okay. Now, what about this article? What
Hmm.
about like and usually something from Exchange I would maybe share,
Yeah.
or I
Great.
would download it and I wouldn't do it illegally, but I would share something
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so that people could read and maybe they would, maybe they wouldn't, maybe only two
Yeah.
people. We got a good conversation.
Yeah. Was there discussion of failures? Or is there ever discussion of failure as
Ye-
sort of an element of curiosity and
Yeah, that has to be nudged more because often
yeah.
people are talking about the great things they're doing in a certain the seeds unit.
Uh-huh.
They opened up that book, step one. They and said, good, this thing over there in my dramatic play area now. We're pretending it's a vegetable store. So there's a lot of good sharing and going on. And you almost have this part of the cultural norms are sharing what you're doing well.
Uh-huh.
When we, and most of the three or so, sort of like a steering committee of us, when we would take the lead to say, this nap time isn't working at all. Like, I have no idea how to do it.
Uh-huh.
This is not going well. I'm thinking of canceling it. It wouldn't be good for their bodies to cancel it. So how do we, when we do come out there and say what's difficult, then people fall in line and jump in and say, yeah,
Yeah.
or my nap time is perfect. But
Yeah.
many would
Yeah.
say, yes, I know, I hear you. And now I have the license to say getting them to listen is hard without giving them points or whatever it is. And then
Sure.
let's get into PBIS conversations. I always
Right.
deep and deep and deep and say what's going on. And then sometimes I feel like I lose track of the class because I'm thinking all theoretically.
Yeah. 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 Um, so I guess of these two things we've talked about so far, the kind of curiosity being the researcher, kind of being the sociologist in the room sometimes, and then connecting um with your colleagues, um what do you think that those are two things that can kind of keep people like us who've been doing it for decades engaged and keep us from, there's an old idea of do you have 30 years of experience or have you done 1 year 30 times? That kind of thing. Do you feel like there's a benefit for
There
us long-termers?
there is, but it gets tested most at hard years or when
Uh,
you're treated so you don't feel treated so well by
sure.
people. And of course that's the biggest test where you're like, why do I have those Peter Lang theoretical books on my shelf still from, hey, when am I going to read them? Why am I
Yeah.
keep ordering stuff from Rutgers Press
Yeah.
about this and that?
Right.
Or
And if I read this, am I just going to be more discouraged or am I going to,
right. Well,
like,
I keep thinking, of course, I keep thinking the next book's going to change it all.
yeah.
Share it with the right people and it becomes a course and whatever.
Yeah.
I don't know what, but it definitely shifts my interest. I can get through a Monday sometimes thinking I'm going to be able to read for 30 minutes
Mm.
or look for more Rutgers Press books while my daughter's at karate and be like, order and
Yes,
think,
relatable.
oh, it's settled. Okay, perfect. There's thousands and thousands of titles. So yeah, not only for me is it I'm thinking it's going to change my practice. I have to say to someone else, look at this book.
Uh-huh.
Probably
Yes.
who thinks like me at this school. Hey, this is making me think about this. And at the cohort, the TK cohort, this book is changing the way I look at how I schedule this. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and it has an influence because they know that I'm done this for so long, and they know of me as
Mm-hmm.
somebody who is still continuing to think in a progressive way and trying and advocating when it comes up about pushing for our rights and for our and sort of union stuff too over the years,
Yeah.
but also for the liberation of what play can give them and why
Mm-hmm.
without just pure chaos.
Mm-hmm.
And I can explain that to teachers and to parents more than I ever could. So that makes me feel a little better. But and other things too, restorative practices. Our district engaged in restorative practices a lot, like 10 years ago
Uh-huh.
fell off, but a lot of us kept it going, and it
Yeah.
seems such a natural thing to do with young kids. The repair, like you don't just say sorry or go to the
Mm-hmm.
corner. You're like, let's see if you can even understand this harm that was caused here. When you say you hate this school, I think you meant I didn't want you to move my seat.
Yeah.
Or it's cleanup. So
Yeah.
it's cleanup. I know it is. And I'm
Yeah.
sorry for saying you hate me or hate the school.
Yeah.
We know what's behind it at least. But when they say
Right.
that to each other as kids, they don't, of course, and that's what
Right. Yeah, they need a little help with that.
that's another way, in a way, a teacher researchy way that I've looked at. How do you make restorative practices and sort of those traditional restorative questions, which are like, what happened? How can you make things better? What have you thought about since? There's like a script for
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the standard ways, and how it wouldn't really work for the youngest kids in
Right.
those questions. But what would work? Like a paper that says, what happened? Draw what happened. I
Right.
didn't even say, why did you kick that kid in the head? I saw
Yeah.
that part. I didn't see the other part, but draw what happened to you and then draw how the
Uh-huh.
world gets them. And I hear you, I can see your side of it.
Yeah.
And the bottom part might say, well, how did you feel? Like hitting all these things I'm supposed to teach, right?
Mm-hmm.
Drawing, dictation, and SEL stuff. And
Yeah.
they care about it because they want to get back to the play and get back to solving a problem with the person. I don't even mandate those things. They're just like a tool. Lately,
Mm-hmm.
that's my most popular area.
Yeah.
Just like, what happened? How did you feel? What should you do now? Like that's it. Three different things. And every year I change that up depending on my group and
Uh-huh.
RP and make photocopies. Like I just do it on the fly
Yeah.
because I'm trying to be responsive to that and remember that they care and they can solve problems with each other
Mm-hmm.
without it being a scripted thing that an adult gets on some cutesy teachers pay teachers thing with those kids.
Yes.
They're like,
Yeah.
that's not
Yeah.
really,
I printed off the questions and nothing has changed.
they still want to kill each other every day. Darn it. But when they voluntarily want it and say, I'll take it, I want to draw. And
Uh-huh.
I'm like, oh, one guy just drew about how they're itching a lot. Okay, that happened. It wasn't about some other kid hurting him.
Did you just
And then, well,
describe one of your
how did
children
you
as one
feel?
guy?
Yeah. Yeah. What do I do now? I don't know. Or like put some
Yeah.
medicine on. Like it's just
Yeah.
an open forum to express what we want them to learn how to express that they don't always do in a circle. I
Yeah.
feel blank today. That's
Right.
just prompted. Not everybody talks like that.
Right.
So that gave me another way over these last maybe at least decade to feel more engaged in authentic stuff going
Yeah.
on with kids and trying to
Yeah.
make it valuable and show other grade levels. Hey, my kids can authentically solve problems with each other when you give them the time without even forcing it.
Yeah.
And they build friendships from that. And they're thinking, whoa, how do you get time? They're like
How did
harder.
you get him to do that? Yeah.
Yeah. For older grades, they just move on to math. And you're like, how do you make the time
Yeah.
be able to do that process? It's really hard.
Yeah. Yeah. The system is not built for success in some of those kinds of situations.
No,
As we
kids
get old,
always
as the
want
kids get
that.
older.
you don't always want just admin or social workers to know how to do the process. You do for
Yeah.
big problems and to have them out of the room, of course.
Yeah.
But most of these would not be needing to have a kid out of the room. You
Hmm.
just need to be able to say, "Oh, I see you're really upset. Like, let's find a place where you can have feelings first and be regulated and stuff." And then,
Hmm.
yeah, your little paper that says what happened, it's kind of like what they wrote.
Hmm.
They said, "I want to be the dog," and you're like, "I want to be the cat." And then let's bring these pre-conference sheets in a way together so
Yeah.
we can talk about it. And sometimes it would be a real formal thing, and sometimes it wouldn't.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, it
I
certainly could work.
Yeah, one thing I was thinking as I'm listening to you talk about the restorative practice stuff, because that's something I've seen on social media, a lot of teachers complaining about and feeling
Mhm.
really put upon that they have to do these restorative
Well,
practice things.
if you
And
think of it that way, it's already in place wrong.
yeah, well, and I
I
think
gotta do it. Like,
that's another, like, that would add to burnout if I felt like I was just always getting these kind of useless mandates about what we need to do instead of going to it with well, how do I make okay, this feels forced and performative, but how do I make it authentic and meaningful? And I think that's kind of what you're describing when you said this doesn't work for the younger 3-year-olds, so I have to switch it around.
and at that time when I did most of the work, it was all they were already all five. It was K. It was kindergarten. But yeah, how do
Uh-huh.
we make it work for them to and we had these chairs that I'm actually sitting on one of the famous chairs. You face each other, you take
Uh-huh.
turns, pass the talkie piece back and forth, and you actually like solve it. And whatever they color a
Yeah.
box on our chart, cool, when you solve it. And
Uh-huh.
like, I don't know if they solved it, but they're laughing.
Yeah.
They fell off the chair and said "but" or whatever. And they're laughing again. And it's not that they're only distracted. They actually
Right.
talked about what happened a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
As I would come over if I'm hearing, no, like I'm going to kill you. But most of
Yeah,
the time, they
right.
were
Yes.
already relaxed enough to talk. They wanted
Yeah.
to do. You're
Yeah.
not setting people against each other that want to hurt each other still.
Right. It's sort
But
of a
restorative
rupture and
skills are not-
repair.
it's elected. It has
Yeah.
to be optional.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
can't be you must do a restorative practice now. That's not how it works.
Yeah, and then document it 3 places, and then and then do a report, and then upload it to all the things that we end up having to do.
Right.
Um, just looking at my notes to make sure I got all my questions so far. What else do you want to talk about?
Um, yeah, I've even looked into doing doctoral stuff and I don't have the
Have
time.
you?
Yeah, I don't have the time or the money.
Yeah.
Those ones that are like every other weekend for 17 years. I'm like, okay,
God,
but
yeah,
then,
no kidding.
but then,
My youngest just finished their PhD, so we were with them over a 4-day weekend to celebrate, to go to commencement and stuff. And there's something really appealing about having a PhD, and I love the poofy hat, but I do not want to work for it, is
yeah,
where I've landed.
I feel like I passed the time where I would have at a better
Yeah,
time.
I
It
don't
probably
have
would have been a
any,
little bit after my MA, which was
yeah, I don't have any goals that I would need it for, and I wrote a book, so I feel like I've
I'm
I've done the things I want to do without the doctor.
yeah. And so and for me, it's not like it would just be more debt and not. It doesn't mean you make a lot more money like
Right? Yeah.
that, and then they get to be like a superintendent because of that. I don't want to do that. I want to be at
No.
anything. So it would
Yeah.
just be to learn more in the work, and for
Yeah.
me, being able to talk to people in a different way.
Yeah.
I did teach it. I've teach taught teach taught adults a little bit and co-taught with some of the professors I used to work
Oh,
with.
sure.
Also, I've stayed like a couple credential courses in the summers, like a while back, and I really did like that experience. They were like, "Oh, he's still a teacher. Oh, he's still
Uh-huh.
a teacher."
Yeah, I think
I would
that's an
have that
important thing.
perspective, and also let's talk about the theoretical stuff, sure, Dewey and whatever. But
Yeah.
it was like I knew how to give funny examples of real stuff
Yeah.
at a public
Yeah.
school. That did feel meaningful, and maybe that's part of my off ramp eventually to
Yeah.
continue the work with humans, not just children,
Yes.
both. But I feel like the that need to read the newest book or hear about it, usually it's from a good interview, and I'll be like, I got to get the
Yeah.
book.
Yeah.
And other podcasts, I'm like, that might be mine, of course, and I'll just absorb it all somehow.
Yeah.
I may or may not. But that interest part won't change. So the
Yeah.
need to get into that, what is slow knowledge? What does that even mean? And so getting into that, some old Peter Lang book about Foucault and early education, I'm like, what is that?
I just ordered 3 Foucault books.
Sounded fascinating. I was like,
Yeah,
what would I do with that? And who would
yeah,
I talk to about it? Like two
yeah,
people that I would know I would talk to about it.
yeah. Well, that's why I started the podcast to trick people into coming and talking to me about things I was reading.
Yeah, that's the right way because, and then the other thing that keeps me going though
Yeah,
is TK and like conferences. So
yeah.
two springs ago, I presented at the CAEYC, the
Hmm.
California one for NAEYC.
Hmm.
Um, and it was about kind of that restorative stuff I was talking about. What does it look like in TK and
Yeah.
all this? And it felt pretty good, but like four people went because it was like the last thing. But then they asked me to do it for this TK Institute, which was
Yeah.
last fall, which was just a lot smaller, but only TK people.
Yeah.
It was a massive turnout for the thing I gave, and I gave almost the same thing again about
Uh-huh.
what does emotion regulation and restorative work look like with
Hmm.
TK.
Yeah.
And it was so fulfilling to do that and to talk to people and to be at a conference and see things, but also present at those. So
Hmm.
that more often, way back, based like when I did a book chapter like way long
Yeah.
ago, your culture with the people that wrote the original book.
Uh-huh.
And they again, it was because mentors were pushing me to say, do it, go there and share that. And sometimes
Yeah.
it one person, and sometimes there'd be more. But it felt good to say you have value of what you've figured out or are you of what you're doing, and you have there's people that want to hear it or
Hmm.
benefit from hearing it at
Yeah.
your school, and parents like it. Some parents every now and then get really into the fact that I've written anything.
Oh,
They're like,
yeah.
"Hey, what else are you working on?" And most are like, okay, just make sure my kid doesn't get hurt.
Sure, exactly. Yeah.
Like,
Will they
that's
still be
cool,
here when
but
I come?
yeah,
Okay. That's good. Yeah.
don't throw rocks at my kid. But
Yeah. I've decided to take it as a compliment when conference planners put me at the end of it the second day, the end of the last day. I've
you want
decided
to keep people there.
to
Don't leave
think,
yet.
yeah, to think of it as, well, they think maybe people will stay. That's probably not really. They're probably like, well, we have to do something for her, so let's just put her at the end of the day.
Yeah. Rusty Keeler was that one of the
Yeah.
who was that the T which one was that? I forget which one. That was the Pasadena one. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
he was the keynote there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that can be. And then it just felt great to know I'm going to be attending, but also presenting.
Yeah. I
Also
love presenting at
presenting it with
conferences. Yeah.
someone else. And then you're thinking, all right, I like the work daily in this room with my colleagues at this school.
Hmm.
And maybe the
Yeah.
next book I will read can be swerved into some new presentation, and it'll be
Yeah.
something new slides that look good, and you can talk about it at a conference or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's I mean, turnover is what it is. It's rare to find people who've spent most of their career in the direct work in the classroom, outside of elementary school. Like I think in formal elementary school, it's not so rare, but in an early childhood program, it sort of feels like there's nowhere to go sometimes when you want to challenge yourself, or you still love being with the kids, but I feel a need for a stretch. And so I think a lot of the things that you've described in this episode are ways to stretch that are pretty accessible. Like you don't necessarily need to leave your direct work with children to change your, I don't
Mm.
know,
Some find that within a school
sort of
they've been at,
grow.
and they are in preschool. Like some of the people that I worked with in the mid 90s
Yeah.
were already working there and still work there.
Oh, wow. That's
Particular
great.
preschool. And it's
Yeah.
because of the meaning it gives them, and they might have an art approach, like they're doing different art projects every day,
Uh-huh.
like that's keeping them busy enough and
Hmm.
satisfied enough. And that
Yeah.
works for teachers. I know teachers here at my school that might be like that.
Yeah.
And I like that too, but I'm like, I can't even organize my own classroom. I got to think of, and then when I think about other things, then I walk away from the classroom. Oh, I can leave it messy because I'm going to talk to the TK group later, and I can say like justify um leaving the cleaning the bathroom, leaving that alone for now because my I also believe that I can make a feel relevant,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
not about cleaning bathroom, hopefully, but a book about whatever, reiterating that I don't do calendar and why.
Yeah.
Reiterating that I know how to make a shared writing fun
Uh-huh.
backwards and they'll scream at me or
Yeah.
backwards.
Yeah. I mean, those are important things people are wondering about every day in their job, right? How to make those things, how to connect better with the children around those things. So write the book. I just tell everybody to write books. If you've got something interesting,
4
write.
million on the Rutledge Press website. Maybe I could get in there somehow. I don't know.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, this has been really fun. Even though I owe you an apology for coming in wildly unprepared. You you did just fine guiding me along my own
That's
lack
what
of
it's like to teach TK.
preparation.
But also, I've never been on a podcast, and you're my favorite podcast. So
Oh, yay. That's fun. Well, I'm really glad that you joined for me for this episode. And maybe we'll have you find a book you want to talk about. We'll do another episode.
you can pretend to read it. Yeah.
Pretend to read. Okay, well, thank you, Aaron. This was really great. I appreciate all that you've shared, and I know that folks will get a lot from this, so I appreciate you coming on. And thanks everybody for listening to another episode of That Early Childhood Nerd.